Daniel Brooks had not slept well in 3 days, and the exhaustion showed in every line on his weathered face as he guided his cargo ship toward the docking bay of orbital station Kepler 7. The station hung in the darkness of space like a massive wheel of steel and glass, its lights glittering against the endless black void. Behind, I did not care about the view anymore because he had seen too many stations and too many stars in his 34 years of life. All he wanted was to deliver his cargo of medical supplies, collect his payment, and find a quiet bar where nobody would ask him questions. His ship, a battered freighter called the Grey Wanderer, shuddered as it locked into the docking clamps with a metallic groan. Daniel ran a hand through his short brown hair and checked his reflection in the dark screen of his console. He looked tired, older than his years, with a thick beard that needed trimming and eyes that had seen too much. The tattoo on his left forearm caught the dim light as he reached for his jacket, a faded image of a broken chain wrapped around a pale blue star. He never talked about that tattoo, and most people knew better than to ask. The docking procedures took longer than usual, and Daniel frowned as he waited for clearance. "Attention all vessels," a voice crackled through the communication system. "Station Kepler 7 is currently hosting a diplomatic summit between the Earth Coalition and the Valorian Empire, and security protocols are elevated throughout all sectors." Daniel groaned and leaned back in his seat. He had heard about the Valorians, tall, elegant aliens with silver blue skin and eyes that seemed to glow with inner light. They were one of the most powerful species in the galaxy, and humanity had been trying to establish peaceful relations with them for decades. Politics meant nothing to Daniel anymore. He had left that world behind 12 years ago when the military discharged him and told him to forget everything he had done. He followed orders, mostly, and built a quiet life hauling cargo between stations. No glory, no medals, no memories, just the hum of engines and the silence of space when the docking clamps finally released him. Daniel grabbed his jacket and headed into the station. The corridors were crowded with diplomats, security officers, and journalists from a dozen different species. Humans in formal suits walked alongside aliens with scales, feathers, and forms that defied easy description. Daniel kept his head down and moved through the crowd, searching for the cargo office where he could complete his delivery. But the station was a maze of identical corridors, and the signs pointed in directions that made no sense to his tired mind. He took a wrong turn, then another, and suddenly found himself in a quiet hallway far from the noise of the main concourse. The walls here were decorated with banners showing symbols he did not recognize, elegant spirals of silver and blue that seemed to shimmer in the soft light. "This must be the Valorian section," he muttered to himself. Realizing his mistake, he turned to leave, but a voice stopped him cold. "Human, you are not permitted in this area." Daniel looked up and found himself facing 4 Valorian guards in gleaming armor, their weapons raised and pointed directly at his chest. They were tall, nearly 7 feet each, with the same silver-blue skin he had heard about, and eyes that burned like twin stars. Behind them stood a figure that made him catch his breath. She was younger than the guards, perhaps in her early 20s by human standards, with flowing white hair that fell past her shoulders and a face of stunning, almost painful beauty. Her gown was woven from fabric that seemed to capture starlight itself, and a delicate crown of silver rested on her brow. This was royalty. Daniel knew it without being told. "I apologize," Daniel said, raising his hand slowly. "I got lost looking for the cargo office, and I will leave immediately." But the woman did not respond. Her glowing eyes had locked onto something, and her entire body went rigid, as if she had been struck by lightning. Daniel followed her gaze and realized she was staring at his forearm, where his jacket sleeve had ridden up to expose the tattoo, the broken chain, and the pale blue star. The woman took a step forward, then another, pushing past her own guards as if they did not exist. Her lips parted, and words came out in a language Daniel did not understand, trembling and broken. Then she spoke again, this time in human speech, and her voice was barely a whisper. "So it was you." Human. Daniel stared at her in complete confusion. "I am sorry, but I do not understand what you mean." The woman's eyes filled with tears that glittered like liquid diamonds against her silver skin. "That mark on your arm," she said, her voice shaking. "I have seen it before, 12 years ago, when I was a child held captive on a station that burned around me." Daniel felt his blood turn to ice. "A human soldier carried me through fire and death," she continued, stepping closer until she stood directly before him. "He wore a helmet that hid his face, but I clung to his arm as he ran. And I saw that image, the broken chain and the star, and I never forgot it. Not for a single day of my life." The guards exchanged uncertain glances, their weapons still raised, but their confidence shaken. "Your Highness," one of them said carefully, "this human is an intruder, and we should—" "Silence," the woman commanded, and her voice carried an authority that brooked no argument. She reached out and touched Daniel's forearm with trembling fingers, tracing the lines of the tattoo as if confirming it was real. "I am Princess Valera Sontith of the Valorian Empire," she said, looking up into his eyes. "And I have searched for you across the stars for 12 years. Daniel could not speak, could not move, could not do anything but stand frozen as memories crashed through his mind like waves against the shore. The slave station, the screaming children, the fire, the smoke, the weight of a small body clinging to his back as he ran for his life. "I never knew," he finally managed to say. "I never knew who you were, and yet you saved me anyway," Valera whispered. "You risked everything for a child you did not know, from a species you had never met. And you asked for nothing in return." The sound of running footsteps echoed down the corridor, and a human woman in diplomatic robes appeared, flanked by security officers. "What is happening here?" Ambassador Claire Morgan demanded, her eyes darting between the Valorian guards, the princess, and the disheveled cargo hauler, who somehow stood at the center of it all. Princess Valera turned to face her, tears still streaming down her silver cheeks. "Ambassador Morgan," she said, "I need you to clear your schedule, because I have just found the man who saved my life, and I believe he is about to change the course of history." Daniel Brooks stood in the middle of the corridor, surrounded by guards and diplomats and a princess who wept at the sight of his tattoo. And he wondered how a simple delivery run had brought him to this moment. Had spent 12 years trying to forget that night on the burning station. Now it seemed the universe had other plans for him. The guards lowered their weapons at Princess Valera's command, but their eyes remained fixed on Daniel with suspicion and confusion. Ambassador Claire Morgan stepped forward, her diplomatic training barely containing the shock that spread across her face. "Your Highness," she said carefully, "perhaps we should move this conversation to a more private location." Valera nodded, wiping the tears from her silver cheeks with a graceful motion. "Yes, you are right, Ambassador. But this man comes with us. I will not let him out of my sight." Daniel wanted to protest, wanted to explain that he was just a cargo hauler who had taken a wrong turn. But the words died in his throat when he saw the look in the princess's glowing eyes. It was a look of desperate hope mixed with 12 years of searching and wondering and dreaming. They led him through corridors of increasing elegance until they reached a private chamber decorated in Valorian style, with curved walls of polished metal and furniture that seemed to float above the floor. Valera dismissed her guards and gestured for Daniel and the ambassador to sit. "Tell me your name," she said to Daniel, her voice still trembling slightly. "Daniel Brooks," he replied. "I used to be a sergeant in the Earth Coalition Marines, but that was a long time ago." "Daniel Brooks," Valera repeated. As if tasting the words, I've wondered about your name for 12 years. Imagined 1,000 different faces behind that helmet. And now you sit before me, a tired man with sad eyes who hauls cargo between stations. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The mission was classified. Your Highness, and I was ordered to forget it ever happened. I never knew who I saved that night. And I never asked. Ambassador Morgan leaned forward with keen interest. What mission are you talking about? And what exactly happened 12 years ago? Daniel closed his eyes, and the memories came flooding back like a river breaking through a dam 12 years ago. The Kovasi Syndicate had operated a network of slave stations in the outer territories, hidden from the major powers and protected by corrupt officials. Earth Coalition intelligence had discovered one of these stations and sent a strike team to destroy its weapons cache before the Kovasi could sell them to hostile forces. Sergeant Daniel Brooks had been part of that team, serving under Lieutenant Ethan Price. The mission was supposed to be simple: get in, plant the explosives, and get out before anyone noticed. They were not supposed to engage the enemy, not supposed to take risks, and definitely not supposed to deviate from the plan. But nothing went according to plan. Daniel remembered the moment he had stumbled upon the holding cells while searching for an alternate route to the weapons storage. The cells had been filled with children, dozens of them from species across the galaxy, stolen from their families and destined for lives of slavery. Some were human, some were Valorian, and some were from species Daniel had never seen before. They had huddled together in the darkness, their eyes wide with fear and despair. Lieutenant Price had found him standing before those cells with his weapon hanging at his side. Rooks, what are you doing? We have a mission to complete, and we do not have time for this. Sir, there are children in here, and we cannot just leave them. That is exactly what we are going to do, Sergeant, because our orders are clear: destroy the weapons and extract. Nothing more and nothing less. Daniel had looked into those cells, into the eyes of children who had lost all hope, and something inside him had broken. No. Sir, what did you say to me, Sergeant? I said no. I am not leaving these children to die, and if you want to stop me, you will have to shoot me. Price had stared at him for a long moment, fury and disbelief warring on his face, but before he could respond, alarms had begun to wail throughout the station. Someone had discovered them, and suddenly the mission shifted from stealth to chaos in the confusion. Daniel had acted. He broke open the cells and led the children toward the extraction point while explosions rocked the station around them. The other Marines had been forced to provide cover, fighting their way through waves of Kolathi guards while Daniel shepherded his flock of terrified children through smoke and flame. One child had fallen behind, a small Valorian girl with silver skin and eyes that glowed with terror. She had been too weak to run, her legs giving out beneath her as the corridor collapsed around them. Daniel had not hesitated. He scooped her up and held her against his chest, her small arms wrapping around his neck and her face pressing against his shoulders. She had been so light, so fragile, and he remembered the way she had trembled against him as he ran. A section of ceiling had crashed down, and Daniel had thrown himself over the child to protect her with his own body. The impact had torn his sleeve, exposing the tattoo on his forearm. The girl had stared at that image, the broken chain and the pale blue star, as if memorizing every detail. I have got you, Daniel had told her. I am not going to let anything happen to you. So just hold on. He had carried her the rest of the way to the extraction shuttle, where the other children were already being loaded. The Valorian girl had not wanted to let go of him, her small fingers clutching his armor with desperate strength, but other hands had reached for her, pulling her into the shuttle, while Daniel turned back to help the last of the Marines escape the burning station. He never saw her face clearly, and she never saw his when the mission was over. Lieutenant Price had filed a report that buried the entire incident. The children were quietly returned to their families through back channels. The slave station became another piece of debris in space. And Daniel Brooks was discharged from the Marines with orders to never speak of what had happened. He had obeyed those orders for 12 years now. He sat in a private chamber on Kepler 7, looking at the grown woman that frightened child had become. "I remember your arms around me," Valera said softly. "I remember the heat of the flames and the sound of your breathing beneath that helmet you told me to hold on. And I did, and I have never let go of that memory." Ambassador Morgan had gone pale. "Your Highness, are you saying that Sergeant Brooks saved your life during a classified Earth Coalition operation?" "I am saying exactly that. Ambassador, this man carried me through fire when his own commanders ordered him to leave me behind." Daniel shook his head. "I did not know you were a princess. I just saw a scared little girl who needed help." "And that," Valera said, her voice breaking, "is exactly why I have been searching for you all these years. You saved me not because of who I was, but because of who you are." She reached across the space between them and took his calloused hand in her delicate fingers. "My father, the High King, knows this story. He knows that a human soldier risked everything for his youngest daughter when he had nothing to gain and everything to lose." Ambassador Morgan stood up abruptly, her mind racing. "Your Highness, this summit, the peace talks, is this why your father agreed to negotiate with humanity?" Valera smiled through her tears. "Ambassador, my father spent decades believing humans were primitive and dangerous. But my rescue changed his heart. He agreed to these peace talks because, one, humans showed him that your species is capable of extraordinary compassion." Daniel sat in stunned silence as the weight of those words settled over him. Everything he had been ordered to forget. Everything he had tried to bury beneath years of quiet solitude had been quietly reshaping the galaxy this entire time, and now the past had finally caught up with him. The hours that followed were a blur of activity that Daniel could barely comprehend. Ambassador Morgan had excused herself to contact Earth Coalition headquarters. Her face a mixture of excitement and deep concern. Princess Valera had refused to leave Daniel's side. As if afraid he might disappear the moment she looked away, they talked for what felt like an eternity, filling in the gaps of 12 years with stories and questions and silences that spoke louder than words. Valera told him about her return to the Valorian homeworld, about the way her father had wept when she was brought before him alive. She told him about the nightmares that had haunted her for years afterward, and about the single image that had always brought her comfort. "The broken chain and the pale blue star. I used to draw it," she admitted, "over and over again, on paper and on walls and in the dust when no one was watching. My tutors thought I was obsessed, and perhaps I was." Daniel listened in silence, unsure of what to say. He had never imagined that his tattoo, a simple mark he had received after his first successful mission, could mean so much to anyone. "I got it when I was 22, he finally said. "It was supposed to represent breaking free from the chains of fear, learning to face danger without running. I thought it made me look tough." Valera laughed, and the sound was like crystal bells chiming in a gentle wind. "To me, it represented hope. It meant that somewhere in the galaxy, there was a human who would risk everything for a stranger. And as long as that symbol existed, I knew I was not alone." A knock at the door interrupted them, and Ambassador Morgan entered with a grave expression. "We have a situation," she announced. "Commander Ethan Price has arrived at the station as part of the military delegation, and he has been informed of your presence, Daniel." Daniel felt his stomach drop. "Price is here?" "He is a decorated officer now, one of the highest-ranking military advisors in the Coalition, and from what I understand, he's not pleased that you have resurfaced." Valera's eyes narrowed with sudden suspicion. Who is Commander Price, and why would he be displeased? Daniel sighed and ran a hand over his face. He was my commanding officer during the rescue mission. He ordered me to leave those children behind, and I disobeyed him. The princess's expression darkened like a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. This man would have let us die. He was following orders, Your Highness. The mission parameters were clear. And I was the one who broke protocol. You were the one who saved lives. Valera corrected him sharply. There is a difference between following orders and doing what is right. Before Daniel could respond, the door opened again, and Commander Ethan Price walked into the room. He had aged well over the past 12 years, with silver threading through his dark hair and a chest full of metals that glittered in the chamber's soft light. His eyes found Daniel immediately, and the look in them was cold enough to freeze hydrogen. Sergeant Brooks, he said, his voice carrying the weight of military authority. I never expected to see you again, Commander, Daniel replied. Rising to his feet, it has been a long time, not long enough. Apparently, do you have any idea what you have done by showing up here? Ambassador Morgan stepped between them with her hands raised. Commander Price, I understand this is a sensitive situation, but Princess Valera has specifically requested. I know what the princess has requested, Price interrupted. And I am telling you that it is a mistake. This man is a liability, and his presence here threatens everything we have worked to achieve. Valera rose from her seat, and despite being shorter than Price, she seemed to tower over him through sheer force of presence. You will explain yourself. Commander, why is the man who saved my life a liability? Price's jaw tightened, but he met her gaze without flinching. Your Highness, the mission that resulted in your rescue was classified for a reason. It involved unauthorized operations in neutral territory, and if the details became public, it could damage the coalition's reputation and undermine these peace talks. The details being that human soldiers infiltrated a slave station and rescued children from multiple species. The details being that a rogue Marine disobeyed direct orders and nearly got his entire squad killed in the process. Brooks is not a hero. Your Highness, he is a cautionary tale about what happens when soldiers let emotion override discipline. Daniel said nothing, because part of him knew that Price was right. He had disobeyed orders, had put his team at risk, had acted on instinct rather than strategy in military terms. He had been wrong, but when he closed his eyes, he could still feel the weight of that little girl on his back, could still hear her frightened breathing and feel her tiny hands gripping his armor. Commander Price, Valera said slowly, I am going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer me honestly. Of course. Your Highness, if Daniel Brooks had followed your orders that night, what would have happened to me and the other children? The silence that followed was deafening. Price's face remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of doubt, perhaps, or the ghost of a conscience he had long since buried. The mission parameters did not include a rescue operation. He said carefully, that is not what I asked. What would have happened to us? You would have died when the station was destroyed, Price admitted. That was an acceptable risk, given the mission objectives. Valera nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Acceptable to whom? Commander, to you, to your superiors, to the politicians who never had to look into the eyes of dying children? War requires difficult decisions, Your Highness, and peace requires acknowledging when those decisions were wrong. Ambassador Morgan cleared her throat. Perhaps we should table this discussion until after the summit. Emotions are running high, and we all need time to process this information. No, Valera said firmly. I will not table this discussion, because this is exactly what the summit needs to address, not trade agreements or border disputes, but the fundamental question of what kind of galaxy we want to build. She turned to face Daniel, and her eyes were shining with determination. Daniel Brooks, I am formally inviting you to attend the summit as a guest of honor. I want the delegates from both species to meet the man who changed my life and, through me, change the course of Valorian policy toward humanity. Price stepped forward with barely contained anger. Your Highness, I must strongly advise against this. Brooks has no security clearance, no diplomatic training, and no business being anywhere near these negotiations. And yet he will be there, Commander, because I am requesting it. And unless you wish to create a diplomatic incident by refusing a formal request from the Valorian delegation, you will make it happen. Price's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he knew when he was beaten. As you wish, Your Highness, but I want it on record that I objected to this decision. Your objection is noted and dismissed now. Please leave us. I wish to speak with Daniel alone. The commander turned and marched out of the chamber without another word, his footsteps echoing like hammer blows against the polished floor when he was gone. Valera let out a long breath and turned to Daniel with a weary smile. I apologize for that. I did not expect such resistance from your own people. Daniel shook his head. Price is not wrong about everything. I did break orders, and I did put lives at risk. You put lives at risk to save lives. Daniel, there is honor in that, even if your military cannot see it. She reached out and touched his forearm again, her fingers tracing the lines of the tattoo. Tomorrow, the summit begins, and I intend to tell everyone the truth about what happened 12 years ago. Are you ready for that? Daniel looked at the princess, who had once been a frightened child in his arms, and he realized that, ready or not, his life was about to change forever. I suppose I do not have much choice, he said quietly. Valera smiled. You always have a choice, Daniel. You taught me that. The summit hall was the largest chamber Daniel had ever seen, with ceilings that soared high above his head and walls lined with holographic displays showing the flags and symbols of both Earth and the Valorian Empire. Hundreds of delegates filled the curved rows of seats, their murmured conversations creating a constant hum of tension and anticipation. Daniel stood near the back of the human delegation, wearing borrowed formal clothes that felt strange against his skin. Ambassador Morgan had found him a dark suit and insisted that he look presentable, but nothing could make him feel like he belonged in this room full of politicians and diplomats. The Valorian delegation sat across the central aisle, their silver-blue skin and glowing eyes creating a stark contrast against the humans on the other side. At the front of the Valorian group, Princess Valera sat with perfect poise, her white hair arranged in an elaborate style and her gown shimmering with threads of living light. She caught his eye and offered the smallest of nods before turning her attention to the podium. The summit began with speeches from both sides, careful words about cooperation and mutual respect that seemed designed to say nothing while appearing to say everything. Daniel's attention wandered as trade agreements and border protocols were discussed in exhausting detail. He wondered if he could slip out without anyone noticing, but then Ambassador Morgan took the podium and surprised everyone. Distinguished delegates, before we continue with our agenda, we have a special presentation from Princess Valera Sontith. Your Highness, the floor is yours. A murmur of confusion rippled through the human delegation as Valera rose and walked to the podium with graceful steps. The Valorians, however, sat in knowing silence, their glowing eyes fixed on their princess. Thank you, Ambassador Morgan, Valera began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. I know many of you are wondering why I requested this time, and I promise I will not waste it with empty words. She paused and looked out at the assembled delegates with an expression that seemed to see into each of their souls. I am here today because of a human, a man most of you have never heard of, whose name appears in no history books, and whose face is known to no one of importance. The confusion in the room deepened, and Daniel felt his heart begin to race. 12 years ago, I was captured by the Kovati Syndicate and held prisoner on a slave station in the outer territories. I was 8 years old, terrified, and convinced that I would die far from home and family. A shocked silence fell over the hall. The Valorian delegates remained still, but the humans exchanged looks of disbelief and growing unease. One night, the station was attacked by human soldiers. Their mission was to destroy weapons, not to rescue prisoners. And their orders were clear that they should not deviate from their objective. Valera's eyes found Daniel in the crowd, but one soldier refused those orders when he discovered the cells where children were held. He made a choice that his commanders did not sanction and that his military would later try to bury. She raised her hand and pointed directly at Daniel. That man is here today. Standing among you, his name is Daniel Brooks, and he is the reason I am alive. Every head in the room turned to look at Daniel, and he felt his face flush with embarrassment and something close to fear. The attention of hundreds of beings pressed against him like a physical weight. Please come forward. Daniel, Valera said gently. Daniel's legs felt like they were made of stone, but somehow he managed to walk down the center aisle toward the podium. The whispers of the delegates followed him like wind through tall grass when he reached the front of the room. Valera took his hand and turned him to face the assembly. This is the face of humanity that my people need to see, she declared. Not your warships or your weapons, not your politicians or your corporations. This man, this tired cargo hauler with calloused hands and a faded tattoo, who risked everything to save children he had never met. Commander Price stood up from his seat in the military section, his face tight with barely controlled anger. Your Highness, I must object to this characterization. Sergeant Brooks acted against direct orders and endangered his entire squad through reckless behavior. The hall erupted in murmurs as the delegates absorbed this contradiction. Valera turned to face Price with ice in her eyes. Commander Price, I believe I know who you are. You were the officer who gave those orders, were you not? Price straightened his shoulders. I was the mission commander, yes, and I made decisions based on the information available and the objectives we were given. And your decision was to leave children to die in a burning station. My decision was to complete the mission and extract my team safely. We did not have the resources or the authorization to conduct a rescue operation. Valera nodded slowly. Tell me, Commander, how many children were on that station? Price hesitated. I do not recall the exact number. 47, Valera said coldly. There were 47 children from 12 different species, including 4 Valorians and 6 humans. I remember every face, Commander. Even if you do not, the chamber had gone completely silent, and you ordered your soldiers to leave all 47 of us to die. The mission parameters. Answer the question. Commander, Price's jaw tightened. Yes. Your Highness, my orders were to complete the mission objectives, and rescuing prisoners was not among those objectives. Valera turned back to the assembly. This is the difference I wanted you all to see, not between humans and Valorians, but between those who follow orders without question and those who listen to their conscience. She looked at Daniel with warmth in her glowing eyes. Daniel Brooks was told to leave children to die, and he refused. He picked me up and carried me through fire and smoke while his own people shot at him, and the station collapsed. Around us, her voice broke slightly. He did not know I was a Mayways around us. Her voice broke this. Princess, he did not know my father was the High King of the Valorian Empire. He knew only that I was a child who could not run fast enough to save herself. Daniel cleared his throat, and his voice came out rough and uncertain. Your Highness, I appreciate what you are trying to do, but I am not a hero. I just did what any decent person would do. And that, Valera said, turning to address the hall once more, is exactly my point. Daniel Brooks believes that saving innocent children is simply what decent people do, that it requires no special courage or recognition. She paused to let her words sink in. My father watched a recording of this moment before agreeing to these peace talks. He told me that he had spent decades believing humans were primitive and violent. But this man showed him that your species is capable of extraordinary compassion. Ambassador Morgan had risen to her feet, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Princess Valera, are you telling us that these peace talks, this historic summit, happened because of what Daniel did 12 years ago? I am telling you exactly that. Ambassador, my father, the High King, agreed to negotiate because one human proved that your kind can choose mercy over convenience, conscience over orders, love over fear. She turned to face Commander Price one final time. And I'm also telling you that the man who gave the order to abandon us has spent 12 years being celebrated as a hero, while the man who actually saved us has been forgotten and discarded. Price's face had gone pale. Your Highness, I was following orders, yes. I know, but Daniel was following something greater, and that is why we are here today. Valera took Daniel's hand and raised it so that his tattoo was visible to the entire assembly. This is the mark that saved my life, a broken chain and a pale blue star, and I want every being in this room to remember it, because it represents everything that humanity can be. Daniel stood frozen in the spotlight, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment and the tears he saw forming in eyes throughout the chamber. He had spent 12 years trying to forget that night on the burning station. Now the whole galaxy was learning his name. The silence in the summit hall stretched for what felt like an eternity as Princess Valera's words hung in the air like echoes of thunder. Daniel stood beside her, his hands still raised to display the tattoo that had changed both their lives. Feeling more exposed than he had ever felt in his entire existence, then something extraordinary happened. The massive holographic display behind the podium flickered to life, and a face appeared that made every Valorian in the room rise to their feet. It was the High King of the Valorian Empire, Valera's father, watching the proceedings from across the stars. He was ancient by any standard, with silver skin that had darkened to a deep blue with age and eyes that burned with the accumulated wisdom of centuries. When he spoke, his voice filled the chamber like a wave of warm light. Daniel Brooks of Earth, I have waited many years to speak these words to you. Daniel felt his knees threaten to buckle beneath him. Your Majesty, please allow me to finish, young human, for I have much to say, and my time grows short with each passing day. The High King leaned forward in his throne, his ancient eyes fixed on Daniel's face. My daughter was the light of my life, the joy of my final centuries, and when she was taken from me, I believed my heart would never know peace again. He paused, and something glistened in his glowing eyes. When she was returned to me, alive and whole, she could speak of nothing but the human soldier who had carried her through fire. She drew that symbol on her arm over again, and she made me promise that one day we would find you. Ambassador Morgan and the other human delegates were watching with expressions of stunned disbelief. I confess that I did not believe her at first. My people have long regarded humans as dangerous and unpredictable, a young species prone to violence and destruction. But my daughter's faith never wavered. The High King's gaze swept across the human delegation, and so I began to watch your kind more closely, to study your history and your culture and your strange, contradictory nature. And do you know what I discovered? He did not wait for an answer. I discovered a species that sends soldiers to war and then punishes them for showing mercy. I discovered a civilization that claims to value life but buries the stories of those who actually save it. His eyes returned to Daniel. But I also discovered something else, something that gave me hope for the future of our galaxy. He leaned back in his throne and spread his hands. I discovered that despite everything your leaders do to suppress it, humans continue to act with compassion. They continue to save strangers, to risk their lives for those they have never met, to choose love over fear in the darkest of moments. The High King smiled, and it transformed his ancient face into something beautiful. Daniel Brooks, you are not unusual among your kind. You are simply one of many humans who carry fire in their hearts, who cannot stand by while innocents suffer, and that is why I agreed to these peace talks. He paused to let his words sink in, not because I believed your governments had changed, or because your diplomats made convincing arguments, but because I knew that your people have the capacity for extraordinary goodness, and any species capable of producing soldiers like Daniel Brooks is a species worth calling friend. Ambassador Morgan stepped forward, tears streaming freely down her face. Your Majesty, on behalf of the Earth Coalition, I am honored beyond words. We will do everything in our power to prove worthy of your trust. See that you do. Ambassador, my daughter's faith in humanity has become my faith, and I do not wish to be disappointed. The High King's image flickered, and his attention shifted to Commander Price, who stood rigid in the military section. As for you, Commander Price, I bear you no ill will, for I understand that you were following the orders of those above you. But I hope this day has taught you that sometimes orders must be questioned, and sometimes conscience must prevail over convenience. Price said nothing, his face a mask of controlled emotion. You may one day face a similar choice again, the High King continued, and I pray that you will remember this moment and choose differently. The transmission ended, and the holographic display faded back to darkness for a long moment. No one moved or spoke then. Ambassador Morgan walked to the podium and removed a document from inside her jacket, the peace treaty that had taken months of careful negotiation to prepare. In light of what we have learned today, she said, her voice steady despite her tears, I believe it is time to make this alliance official. The signing ceremony was simple, but profound. Representatives from both species added their marks to the document while the assembly watched in respectful silence. When it was done, a cheer erupted from the human delegation, and even the reserve Valorians allowed themselves small smiles of satisfaction. Daniel stood apart from the celebration, feeling like a visitor in someone else's dream. He had done nothing today except stand still and let others speak about him. Yet somehow he had become the symbol of a peace that would reshape the galaxy. Commander Price approached him as the delegates began to mingle and celebrate. Brooks, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. Daniel looked at him with surprise. Sir? I spent 12 years believing I made the right call that night, following orders, completing the mission, doing what soldiers are supposed to do. But watching that princess talk about you, watching the High King speak with such respect for what you did, I realized something. Price's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I was wrong. And you were right, and I have spent my entire career being rewarded for the wrong decision while you paid the price for the right one. Daniel shook his head. Commander, you did what you thought was best with the information you had. I do not hold any grudge against you. That makes one of us. Price admitted. I will be retiring after this summit. Brooks, I think it is time I stopped giving orders and started listening to my conscience. He offered his hand, and Daniel shook it. For what it is worth, you would have made a hell of an officer if the military had not been too blind to see it. Price walked away without another word, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts. A gentle touch on his arm made him turn, and he found Valera standing beside him with a small wooden box in her hands. I have something for you, she said, opening the box to reveal a pendant made of crystal and silver, carved in the shape of a flame. This is a Valorian pendant of eternal gratitude. It is given only to those who have performed great services for our people, and you are the first human to ever receive one. Daniel took the pendant carefully, feeling its weight in his palm. Your Highness, I do not know what to say. Say that you will remember us when you are back on your cargo ship, flying between stations in the quiet of space. Say that you will remember that you changed the course of history by simply being kind. Daniel tucked the pendant into his pocket and looked at the princess who had once been a frightened child in his arms. "I will remember. Your Highness, I will always remember." Valera smiled and touched his cheek with gentle fingers. "My people have a phrase for humans like you. Daniel Brooks, we call you those who carry fire in their hearts. It means that you burn with compassion, even when the universe tries to extinguish it." She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his forehead in a gesture of blessing. "Go well, fire carrier, and know that wherever you travel, you have friends among the stars." The next morning, Daniel Brooks walked back to his cargo ship with a pendant in his pocket and a strange lightness in his chest. He powered up the engines, requested departure clearance, and guided the gray wanderer out of the docking bay into the endless darkness of space behind him. Valera watched from the observation deck of Station Kepler 7, her glowing eyes following the small ship until it became a speck of light among the stars. "Thank you, Daniel Brooks," she whispered to herself. For everything, Daniel settled into his pilot's chair and set a course for his next delivery. A medical supply run to a colony on the edge of human space. Nothing special, nothing important, just another job for a tired cargo hauler who wanted nothing more than peace and quiet. But as the stars stretched into lines of light around him, he found himself smiling. He reached into his pocket and touched the cool surface of the Valorian pendant, feeling its weight like a promise for the first time in 12 years. Daniel Brooks did not feel alone, and somewhere across the galaxy, in a throne room of silver and light, an ancient king told his grandchildren the story of a human soldier who had carried fire in his heart. The story would be told for generations to come, in languages and on worlds that Daniel could never imagine, and it would always begin the same way, with a broken chain, a pale blue star, and a choice that changed everything.